My name is Jukka-Pekka Joensuu, JP, and I'm a partner at Eversheds Sutherland. I have been building and participating cable projects since late 90s. It is my great honor also to welcome my two dear colleagues, Walter and Cristina, to be here with me today and discuss these topics. Walter, why don't you briefly introduce yourself?
Thanks, JP. I'm Walter Kulvik. I'm a partner with Eversheds Sutherland in London, and where I head our subsea fiber team. Cristina?
Thanks. So I'm Cristina Audran-Proca, corporate M&A partner at Eversheds Sutherland in Paris. I've practiced over 17 years in cross-border M&A, especially in the TMT sector, and have had the pleasure to advise on submarine cable networks financings and development, from both the upstream financing and consortium arrangements and up to the more commercial agreements that come into play.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to have you today. I would actually start and act as a moderator in this discussion and start with a very highly relevant topic, which is a geopolitical influences, which is in the rise of different markets, including Middle East, Asia, and Africa. And I have to say that I have a real personal experience of this, where I led the first plans for the Arctic cable in 2015, and are fortunate to the change in the geopolitical environment. We were forced to set that project down, let's say, lately, and then start a new, maybe even more interesting project to reach the Arctic and three continents in another way. But for me, that was a real evidence that the market and the world has really changed, and quite rapidly. Walter, how do you see the change in the markets and geopolitical situation as it is today?
Thanks, JP. I mean, what we're seeing a lot is an increasing concern around government intervention, something that's really creeping up as a material issue on most of the new cables. And it's really been highlighted since the start of the Ukraine war. In Europe, we've seen France, Norway, the UK, all, for example, ramp up commentary on the question around how you really defend something that's core infrastructure now for the economy, but really quite difficult to actually monitor. I mean, we've seen already these issues crop up, as JP mentioned, in Asia. We've seen some of the cables, for example, that were routed through Hong Kong being moved out of Hong Kong. We're also seeing and hearing of the PRC government being more selective on licensing on fiber that's meant to go through the South China Sea. So it's really starting to come to the forefront of governments and defense policies and national interests as to how cables are being looked at, where they're being placed, access rights, usability, monitoring. And it's something where I think it's very much a state of flux where no one quite knows what it's going to look like, although I think we're all expecting regulation and government intervention to increase. But it's at the same time, I think, part for the industry to try and educate governments as to what subsea is, how it works, and particularly how it's now working largely with cloud computing, which, of course, makes all this much more international than just the cable, say, going between the UK and France.
Oh, thank you very much. I think that's highly interesting, and I don't think that we have straight answers as we used to have. So this world has becoming really more, let's say, harder to forecast what's going on in the future. But Cristina, how do you see that from France's point of view? I think that from the general market, we see that a lot of things are happening in France, and also the Marseille, which has been the really, it's a hot place to land the cables. Do you expect anything happen from the regulatory perspective, or let's say from the global perspective? How will France and Marseille stick in this scenario?
Yeah, thanks a lot, JP, for that question. So yes, definitely France has like this privileged position where it's between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean. So it's at the central stage of European connectivity. It's the most connected country within the European Union. I believe there are about 23 cables that land here on both sides. And obviously, Marseille is a real success story in all that project, because it turned out to be from just a passage point of all these cables coming into Europe and then going to Paris and in other places. It became a key point where data actually sits in data centers here. There is this interplay about between the data center connectivity and also the cables that land here. There are now about 5 data centers here, in particular by Digital Realty. And all that creates this ecosystem that's very, very favorable for landing new cables in a safe way here. And France has taken a few measures recently that are meant to encourage further investment and further landing of this infrastructure here. One that is very well received by the industry was the circular that was published in 2020, which gives just a single point of contact for cable developers into all the French administration. So you don't have to deal with all the different administrations. There is a single point of contact, and that's been a huge facilitator here. And then there are the players in Marseille that are also encouraging and providing secure solutions for cables landing here. For example, the Marseille port has this turnkey solution where you can land the cable in the port in a very secure way and in a very quick way. So all of that makes this ecosystem, which is really favorable for further development of the industry here. I think Marseille now is at number 7 in the global digital hubs, and France is the only country which has 2 global digital hubs in the top 10. So I think that trend is going to continue. And also a big part of that is the EU Global Gateway project as well, that I think, JP, perhaps you wanted to touch on a bit later, which is going to further develop the connectivity of the EU and France into other parts of the world.
Oh, I think that's a highly interesting subject, and I would actually pick up from your thoughts this turnkey solution that Port of Marseille has created, and I think that's really something which other areas should take a closer look, because not only it creates a very safe, let's say, gateway from the sea to the data centers, but it also provides a sort of neutral access and sort of neutrality and let's say carrier-free sort of place to invest in new digital infrastructure. I also would say that the government intervention is also maybe focusing in the cables in coming years, as cables are becoming more and more part of the critical infrastructure also for the governments, and thus this global gateway program in the European Union, in which Commission has allocated a sort of funding package up to 150 billion euros to steer development in other areas, and I would actually pick one region, which is Africa. Walter, how do you see Africa and Middle East from your perspective?
I mean, it's probably the biggest growth sector. I mean, Asia was first, but the number of new cables being pulled through the Middle East, the number of cables now looking at crossing through, for example, Saudi Arabia rather than going through sea routes, only it is a huge development. I mean, the continued construction to Africa and other cable manufacturers looking and installers looking at other routes through Africa and the increase of that. We, for example, seen clients are considering doing combination of subsea with satellite terrestrial also to get better access to parts of Central Africa. So that will continue to play a much bigger role, as it's one of the growth areas in the world where access has traditionally been limited. But it does throw its own issues as well. I mean, we're seeing a lot of different issues in terms of regulations, access rights, etc., from governments in the region. So it's not without its difficulties, but it's something where we're seeing interest both from the traditional cable players, but also new coming investors like infrastructure funds looking at actually accessing that opportunity to build cables through Middle East and into Africa.
Oh, thank you so much. I think we would love to discuss these topics even more, but as we are limited in time, so I would just ask you, Cristina, do you have any sort of final thoughts for this discussion about how will we deal with security issues?
I think that question is at the forefront of everybody that has an interest, a stake in this industry, because of the geopolitical tensions. And I'm not only talking about the Ukraine war, but obviously about the rivalry between the US and China that's being played out in the subsea cable sector. And all of those items make it so that now governments are highly interested in the sector, and it is a sector that has been historically very difficult to regulate at an intergovernmental level. The conventions that govern this are some of them old, like the UNCLOS convention, but they are at the core of the debate right now. From everything that has to do to the security of the physical infrastructure itself, to cybersecurity, that's even harder to police and to control. So I believe we're going to see countries taking more and more action in this respect to protect their own national security interests, and that's going to be very interesting to see in the coming months and years. And obviously, the other power player in the sector, so to speak, are the hyperscalers themselves. And it's going to be very interesting to see how they transform even further the sector, as they've done over the past 10 years or so. And I'm sure they are going to continue to increase their stake in these infrastructures. They are set to go to almost 80% in share of capacity overall. So it's going to be very interesting to see that dynamic between governmental intervention and then the hyperscalers continuing to increase their stake in the industry.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Walter. Thank you, Cristina. Hope to see you all in future subsea cable projects. Thank you very much.
Thanks, JP.
Thank you.